So I'm going to talk about what is mental health, about aging and mental health, about arthritis, pain and mental health.
The face of my patients have changed, primarily to 55 plus, because people are seeking medical cannabis to help manage their pain.
There's also a grieving process that takes place as we see a decline in our physical health, as we're dealing with chronic illness.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer. Millions of Canadians suffer from arthritis, and it takes a toll emotionally as well as physically. We held a special event called Arthritis Talks, Age with Optimism. And since so many Zoomers are affected, we wanted to share this campaign with you. We'll highlight the keynote addresses delivered by two respected doctors in the fields of arthritis and chronic pain, as well as geriatric psychiatry. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
Over 4.6 million Canadians have arthritis. By 2031, this will grow to 7 million. More than 10% of Canadian adults have osteoarthritis, the ordinary degradation of the joints associated with aging. Osteoarthritis accounts for more than 80% of hip replacements and over 90% of knee replacements in Canada. Another 1 million Canadians live with inflammatory arthritis, including rheumatoid arthritis. While modern pharmaceutical treatments, from biologics to immunosuppressant drugs, are often a first choice in treating arthritis, increasingly, many are turning to CBD cream, wondering if it could be their joint pain magic bullet. In the meantime, it's costing the Canadian economy an estimated $33 billion a year. And if left unchecked, that figure could more than double to $67 billion a year by 2031.
In addition to the physical limitations, arthritis takes a toll on your mental state. But there are strategies to help you cope with this disease. Dr. David Kahn is the Vice President of Education and the inaugural Director of the Centre for Education and Knowledge Exchange in Aging at Baycrest in Toronto. He's also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto.
So I'm going to talk about what is mental health, about aging and mental health, about arthritis, pain and mental health, and some ideas about coping with pain. And we'll talk about prevention and health promotion. The pattern, this is interesting. If you look at, on average, if you look at happiness through life, different ages, you'll see the ages there, different decades at the bottom. It looks like the bottom is actually in the 40s, and then happiness seems to increase in later life. How many of you are surprised by that? Not that many of this group. Interesting. I'm always struck by this statistic, actually. It's very interesting. Why are the 40s so difficult? There was a fascinating study done in San Diego on successful aging. So they looked actually at individuals between the ages of 21 and 100, doing phone interviews, mail-in surveys, and so on. It was a complex study. But if you look at this finding, so physical health declines through life. That's no surprise. Aging is difficult. But sense of well-being seems to increase all the way through life. Now, isn't that remarkable and maybe a little hard to explain? But that's what the data showed. There are descriptions, of course, about how to be more optimistic, how to develop a positive attitude. And some of these simple ideas actually can be helpful. So, actually looking at the bright side of life, or, when you smile, the whole world smiles with you. Having faith in yourself and the power of the universe, which, raises the whole issue of spirituality and the benefits of that potentially. Associating with positive people, that does seem like a good idea. It doesn't mean getting rid of all your friends who might be going through a hard time, of course, but read inspiring stories, repeat affirmations that inspire and motivate, visualizing the things that you want to happen and learning to master your thoughts, meditation. So Sasson describes all of these as steps you can actually take to have a more positive attitude. There was an interesting study a number of years ago out of Yale that divided middle-aged people up into two groups. So one group had a more negative view of aging, and the other group had a more positive view of aging. And they studied these people for several decades, and the remarkable finding was that the group that had a more positive view of aging lived, on average, for more than 7 years longer than the group that had a more negative view. Now, you could sort of argue about what was the cause and effect there, but it was a fascinating study. So how do we treat someone who's got a serious depression? The first thing that you might think of are antidepressant medications, and we have a whole range of different antidepressants that certainly help some people. And if you compare the effects of an antidepressant to a placebo, in most studies the antidepressants are better than an inactive placebo. Although, surprisingly enough, placebo is quite a good drug as well. The inactive substance that a person gets in a pill that has really nothing in it actually works quite remarkably well. And we always wonder about why. Does that make any sense? We think it's because people, when they're enrolled in a study, actually get really looked after. They're seen regularly, they're evaluated, they have a lovely research nurse who speaks to them and gives them a cup of tea. That's a social event. So a placebo is not just a placebo. Then we come to psychotherapies or talk therapies, which surprisingly, it might surprise you, but psychotherapies are remarkably effective in helping people with depression. The one that's talked about a lot is CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy. We'll talk a bit about that later. There are also other interventions, various forms of electrical stimulation, neurostimulation. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is a new one on the block that seems very interesting and is a very benign kind of treatment. Exercise. Believe it or not, exercise alone can be a very effective intervention for major depression. Light therapy for people who get more depressed in the winter. So let's talk a bit about pain. So there are different ways of understanding pain, different models. The biomedical model is that simply pain is the result of an underlying disease. So you have an arthritic joint, it hurts, that's it. That's a simple model. The gate control theory is that pain is actually influenced by higher brain centers responsible for cognitions and emotions. So I have a quote here from Dr. Turk from the University of Washington, who says that the rain of pain falls mainly in the brain, which means if we didn't have a brain, we wouldn't actually feel much pain. And that's why what I'm going to say next is that emotions, depression, stress can all affect our perception of pain. And the cognitive behavioral model includes these various factors in contemplating why we have pain. Now, this comes from the Arthritis Society website. This is the most important slide I'm talking about today. So it basically says that, yes, you have disease, it creates pain, but there are all sorts of factors then that contribute to that, as I was just saying. A fair amount has been written about the psychological approaches to understanding and treating arthritis pain. In this particular paper, the discussion focuses on actually training in pain coping strategies. And there are a whole variety of these that really revolve around actually a cognitive behavioral approach. And some of these are really basic, like learning relaxation techniques. Mindfulness has become very popular. Positive visual imagery, pacing one's activity, taking a problem-solving approach where you actually define what is the problem you're struggling with and try to come up with solutions. And cognitive restructuring, which sounds really fancy, but what that really means is trying to think more deliberately and positively, because if you're depressed and in pain, there's a natural tendency to think negatively. We think negatively about ourselves, about the people around us, about the future, about the world. So the cognitive behavioral approach actually challenges us and says, okay, let's write down what we're thinking and how it makes us feel. A lot of homework involved. You got to keep writing it down. But the goal is to either work with a therapist or on your own to actually challenge those thoughts and realize that perhaps you're thinking too negatively. And a lot of studies suggest that those kind of changes really can make a difference.
When we come back, Dr. David Kahn discusses preventative measures to stay healthy longer. Stay tuned.
You actually increase your brain gray matter to the equivalency of about half a year younger than otherwise. So lots of good evidence.
Welcome back. We know how important our mental health is to our overall well-being. So we continue this special episode of theZoomer with Dr. David Kahn as he discusses preventive measures to maintain our mental health.
So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as Ben Franklin said. So we're all concerned as we age about our memory, about the possibility that we could have cognitive decline or even develop dementia. And a paper in The Lancet, that's the British journal, 2 years ago, suggested that there are modifiable risk factors for dementia, so things we can do to reduce our risk. They even went as far as to say that if all of these things listed on the screen there were actually carried out, we could potentially delay or prevent a third of all dementia cases, which would be a dramatic change in our society and the healthcare costs. There are many lifestyle approaches that can improve brain and mental health, and I don't really think of mental health and brain health as being different. It's all integrated. So all of the things listed here are both good for your mood, but also good for your memory and cognition. So there are reasons to make a change. So exercising never gets old. You reduce your risk of dementia, you lower your risk of chronic illness and disability, you improve your mood, better sleep quality, maintaining function and independence, decrease risk of falls, and increase longevity. Social activity, also very important, and the health risks associated with loneliness are of a similar risk magnitude to smoking and obesity. Isolation is an independent risk factor for developing dementia. Secure relationships, the single most predictive variable in well-being in later life. Challenging one's brain. So yes, doing all sorts of things that can keep the brain active. So there's no question that the more education you have through life, the lower your risk of dementia. Complex, novel activities help the most. Changing routines can help. Playing games, bridge, reading. Watching television, and we're in the Zoomer studios here. Some television shows are wonderful and keep your brain active, but we have to be careful not to become couch potatoes. So what about diet? Now, we know diet is important, and it doesn't take a genius to realize which of these two groups of foods are better for you and increased benefits with a Mediterranean diet are clear-cut and seem to help us, certainly in terms of our brain function and mood. It's very hard to change one's behavior for all of us, and there are many excuses. The common excuses are, I am too busy, stressed, old, sick to do anything or to change anything, or this isn't really relevant for me or my medical situation, or it's too late for this to make a difference for me. Or if I try this and it doesn't work out, I'll fail or let people down. Or this goal is too small to matter. And these are all myths. So the Fountain of Health actually creates behavior-changing tools, very simple ones. They're available to clinicians, to health professionals to use with their patients, their clients, to help their patients make simple changes. 3 simple steps. So first set a baseline, then set a SMART goal, and then track your progress, and then repeat. And what is a SMART goal? A SMART goal is something that is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-limited. So here are some examples. So physical activity, walk to the mailbox 3 times a day for 1 week, or get up during the ads, during the 6 o'clock news 4 times a week. Social activity, call a friend or family member once a week. Set up a coffee date once in the next 4 weeks. Under Brain Challenge, read the paper 3 mornings a week or listen to a radio program twice a week. And there are other things we can do for our mental health, like attend a yoga class once a week for 4 weeks, write a gratitude journal, or meditation, even for short periods of time. And of course, it takes, you have to learn how to meditate. You can't just do it. And then tracking one's progress. There are different ways of doing it, either using online materials or simply writing it down. But what we find is that if people set a goal and actually write it down and then track it, and you can either do that on your own or maybe with your physician or another health professional, we've studied this, and it's so many people report that, yes, they're at least partially meeting their goal, which is really exciting.
When we come back, Dr. Shelley Turner discusses CBD and arthritis. That's next.
We always look at the risk versus benefit of all the medicines we prescribe, and cannabis being one of those. Clinical research is hugely important in innovation and improving care for patients.
Welcome back. Dr. Shelley Turner is being hailed as a trailblazer in the medical cannabis community, specializing in cannabinoid therapies for addictions, sleep and mood disorders, and chronic pain. She discusses CBD and arthritis as this special episode of theZoomer continues.
Thank you very much. What a great pleasure it is to be here in Zoomer's studios. I'm actually a Zoomer, so it's kind of fun to be here with some boomers, I think, as well. So welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about medical cannabis, edibles, topicals, and oils. Oh my, right? There's a lot of information there. So much information so that actually, as of today's date, there are over 360,000 people that have accessed medical cannabis in Canada. 360,000 have applied for a medical document. So very exciting times in terms of research in this area. I'm a student of cannabis. I learned from my patients that as well as the sheer volume of patients that I do see. My background is really actually in addiction and mental health. I've kind of fallen into the track of prescribing medical cannabis to my patients, and I've done this for about just over 6 years. So from addiction to mental health, the face of my patients have changed primarily to 55 plus, because people are seeking medical cannabis to help manage their pain. What I do believe is that addiction is not a moral failure. I believe that stigma is a barrier to care, not only for people living with addiction, but also for people trying to seek care for medical cannabis. I'm wondering if a number of you here and an online audience may have had difficulty accessing cannabis through their physicians not really understanding or not knowing how to prescribe. We always look at the risk versus benefit of all the medicines we prescribe, and cannabis being one of those. And then always clinical research is hugely important in innovation and improving care for patients, and this is something that I'm very interested in. So this is a very brief diagram here on really the timeline of medical cannabis. This is not a new drug. Would you agree? This is not a new drug. This has been around for millennia. And quoting Dr. Zach Walsh, who is a psychologist out in BC who works a lot with substance use, PTSD, he calls this an ancient and gentle medication. So when we start to look at the history, we can look back to 1000 BC, where there was a pharmacopoeia on the list of different ways of using medical cannabis. Over 100 written recipes for particular ailments. We look at a Chinese physician who operated on his patients using cannabis and wine. Now, we call that a Saturday night in Gimli, but No, we don't. But it's really I'm very thankful for research and anesthesia in this 21st century. But we fast forward to 1964, where Dr. Rafi Mahulam, who is still practicing as a bench scientist, he discovered that actually there was a molecule called THC. And then fast forward to the 90s, where we discovered that we actually have receptors in our body for cannabis, and we make our own endocannabinoids. So the basics. As I've alluded to, the endocannabinoid system is within us all. We are born with this system that helps us maintain balance. Balance as we modulate pain, mood, sleep, as well as our immune system. So when we look at the receptors in our body, CB1 receptors are for THC. Those are primarily in our nervous system. CB2 receptors are pretty much everywhere else, but heavily involved within our immune system. So I always say the dose is the poison. When legalization happened, how many people's hair started on fire? Oh my God, legal cannabis, what are we going to do? People are going to be running down the streets intoxicated. Well, that hasn't really happened, actually. When we start to look at the stats, and I actually just pulled them up today, age groups that we were really concerned about, youth, actually has gone down in numbers. The numbers have not changed to our 18 to 25 year. So, but who's using more cannabis? Us guys with gray hair, right? So when we talk about the THC, it is intoxicating, but again, the dose is the poison. Generally, most of my patients are using less than 20 milligrams a day in a 24-hour period, dependent on what I see them for. In my patients that are trying to deprescribe from opiates, we have the ability to use cannabis as a substitution. It doesn't work 100% for everybody, but again, I always say my patients fall into a bell curve. The people in the middle generally are doing well. We deprescribe all kinds of medications over the counter, but it's the tails. It's the people that may be too sensitive to THC or the people that it doesn't really work very well. So those are the people that I'm very interested in. And then, of course, CBD. So cannabidiol, which is the non-intoxicating form of cannabis. I don't say it's not psychoactive in the sense that it doesn't make you high. It does work in your brain, but it doesn't cause intoxication. And it activates many systems, especially our immune system. So most of the medical patients that I see are generally cannabis naive, and we educate them. They generally are consuming cannabis to help them reduce harmful medicines or medicines that they're really that they're taking too much of, primarily around opiates and benzodiazepines. And as Dr. Khan was alluding to, we worry about our elder population using benzodiazepines, and I've had a lot of success actually tapering people off. So most patients that are using medically are over the age of 50. The challenge with many patients, my oldest patient is 98 years old. Her 72-year-old friend brought her to my health center, rolled her in her wheelchair, and she was very excited to try this new medicine.
When we come back, more from Dr. Shelley Turner. That's next.
So high CBD is generally my rule of thumb. I generally go from 20 to 60 milligrams a day for patients to start them, and then add in THC as needed.
Welcome back. We continue with this special episode of theZoomer featuring the Arthritis Society's campaign, Arthritis Talks, Age with Optimism. Dr. Shelley Turner is an expert in medical cannabis and its uses for chronic pain. Take a look.
So for topicals, anybody recognize those chubby fingers there? Ouch, eh? So topicals work very nicely for patients. We know that we've got this skin and we've got 3 layers that we need to get through. Pardon me. We have to have a good understanding of what type of topical will actually permeate the skin. This is a model of inflammation. Pardon me. So this is a very complex diagram of inflammation and how our endocannabinoid system works to help reduce that inflammation. It works in a very complex manner. Initially, that inflammation is acute. But as you go forward with that inflammation, if it's not arrested at that point, it develops into a chronic inflammatory process. Thank you. So we worry about people developing chronic inflammatory issues, especially with skin rashes as it relates to people living with psoriatic arthritis, any of the autoimmune arthritis. We don't want to get into a chronic situation. And I've had very good success with topicals for patients living with psoriasis. So allergies with topicals. So out in the market, in the legal market, there's various forms of topicals, and they're just starting to come out in the market. But I have many patients that come in with some very nasty smelling tubs of stuff that they've made themselves. And there could be an active component of cannabis. This is a topical cannabis that's not been cooked or activated, and that is the rash. So it's always good to do a test site when you're using topicals. So, as I said, the absorption rate, it does not cross the blood-brain barrier, so you're not going to get high if you apply a topical. Using caution with open areas, especially if there's THC. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes for that to take effect, and it can last anywhere from 4 to 12 hours. I have many patients that will use this on joints, on their back, and have had very good success. So these aren't your Kokum's brownies, so your granny. Okay? I don't know how many times I've had patients come in and talk about somebody made them an edible, and then they had a bad experience. I actually had one patient go to the hospital emergency department because he had taken an edible somebody had made, and he thought, oh, this isn't working. Right? So he was like, 45 minutes, this is not working. So he takes another one. And then at about an hour, yeah, he was on that ride for about 8 hours and couldn't get off, right? So you have to be very careful. But again, the formulations are endless. Oil-based generally is the go-to in terms of cannabis oils. They come in many formulations, high THC, THC and CBD, and primarily CBD. There's different ratios. So you have to really watch the dosing. The dosing, I think, will be anywhere from 1 to 10 milligrams of THC, and there will be many formulations with CBD. If ever you're in a recreational situation and you're thinking about using cannabis, please use both together. Always have CBD with it, because that quite often will help push the THC off the receptor, so you're not getting as much of an effect. So again, with absorption and ingestion, as I kind of alluded to, please wait. Please wait. If you haven't had any effect after 90 minutes, then of course, by all means, go ahead and try another dose. But it can affect dosing, especially in patients living with perhaps diabetes that may have a really slow gut or gastroparesis. It can take somewhere to 2 to 4 hours. My friends that are on the SheCan Facebook website, they're a group of women that are supporting each other. I think there's 4,000 of them out there. They always talk about having a small fatty snack. So cannabis likes fat. It works best in our bodies. If patients are having difficulty and they're saying it's really not working, I always say have something like a small fatty snack to help that absorb faster for you. So this is just an overview. This is a table that I give all my patients, and it's just an overview of how you can use cannabis. What I'm actually missing on this one, and we're not going to talk about that today, is suppositories for our patients that are not able to take anything by mouth, that don't want to smoke, and especially for our patients living with GI problems, so ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, women living with endometriosis can use that as well. But really, this is just an overview of what I've just spoken about. And then dosing. So high CBD is generally my rule of thumb. I generally go from 20 to 60 milligrams a day for patients to start them, and then add in THC as needed. It is really dose dependent on affordability, and for all of you that are on, whoever is on medical cannabis, we have to really look at the price point for patients. A lot of patients say, oh my gosh, I wish I could take more, but they can't afford it. Cannabis naive patients on opioids, I can speak to a particular case, 2 gentlemen that I'm caring for now. One is on, both are on high dose opiates. This gentleman was on, I think, 120 equivalents morphine, and in 6 weeks he's come off all of that using medical cannabis. And so high CBD, 200 milligrams a day, plus about 40 milligrams of THC. And I think within the next, so he's still having withdrawal from that, but he said he can't believe it because he actually doesn't have pain. He's just really going through withdrawal. So he's done really well, and he has degenerative disc disease and arthritis in his back. So again, looking at anxiety versus depression, I have a lot of patients that will come in and say, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious and I'm smoking so much cannabis. They're taking way too much THC. THC can actually be, it's counterintuitive. Too much THC can actually make your anxiety worse. So I generally will encourage those patients to use high CBD and low percentage THC. As well, in depression, patients will have a little bit more THC for activation. And always with anybody that you're considering cannabis or trying it even recreationally, please go low and slow. If you take away anything from today, low, low, low. And increase your dose every 1 to 3 days.
When we come back, we held a special question and answer session for the audience. That's next.
Most that use THC during the day are taking such small amounts with such a good CBD buffer that they're fine.
We've been showcasing a special webinar held by the Arthritis Society that focused on this ailment and ways to live with it. During this event, we held a question and answer session with both Dr. David Kahn, a specialist in aging and psychiatry, and Dr. Shelley Turner, a medical cannabis and chronic pain expert.
As we mentioned, we've been getting some questions in online, so we'll start with those. To get my glasses on to read them. So first question, what are the ways to stay positive when you're dealing with chronic pain?
Yeah, so I think that there are a whole variety of things, as I've mentioned throughout the talk, that can help a person be more positive. And for each person, those kind of things are different. But I would say, first of all, it helps if you have other people in your life that can assist and can help you to be positive. And as Sasson said, it's good to associate with positive people, and hopefully either a friend or a family member, someone who can be a bit of a cheerleader. That can be really important. I think realizing and reflecting on one's own thoughts. So realizing that, you might be depressed, and that's not unusual, and it's really understandable when you're dealing with chronic pain. So many of the strategies I talked about throughout the talk, I think, can be employed. But I think actually writing down one's thoughts and then one's feelings and trying to see if there's a link between the two. There's a very good book called Mind Over Mood by Greenberger that's designed for individuals to help them look at their thoughts and feelings and how they interact. And that approach, and there are other best-selling books as well that can be really helpful in looking at the connection between emotions and thoughts.
Okay, next question is how to cope with grieving the loss of things I could do before arthritis?
Yeah, so as it says on the Arthritis Society website, when we think of grief or bereavement, we think about the loss of a loved one, but there's also a grieving process that takes place as we see a decline in our physical health, as we're dealing with chronic illness. And it's important to realize that and reflect on that. And there are all sorts of very normal emotions that one goes through when one is dealing with grief. And so again, reflecting on those emotions, not so much as being very, very negative or unusual, but actually it's a normal process as we adjust to our new selves, as we, all of us as we age, have to cope with a lot of these changes.
Can antidepressants help with osteoarthritis pain?
Yes, so antidepressants, of course, are good for mood, and they're also good for anxiety, actually. So if you have a lot of very serious anxiety, antidepressants are actually the medications of choice if you need medications. But there's some evidence that certain antidepressants seem to actually be helpful for pain as well. There's one called duloxetine or Cymbalta that where there's some pretty good evidence that that it can help both depression and pain. So physicians will often prescribe that kind of antidepressant. It's called a dual-acting antidepressant. It works on two different brain chemicals.
Okay, let's open it up to the studio audience. Does anybody have a question? Why don't you tell us your name first, please?
Oh, yes, my first name is Marion, and I'm wondering why you hadn't mentioned surgery. I had excruciating osteoarthritis about 14 years ago. Medication didn't cut it. And so I was recommended to have surgery, and I postponed it for 3 years, and I could not walk a block by that time. So if I hadn't had the bilateral hip replacements, I would probably be in a psych unit now in a wheelchair. So I just wondered why you hadn't mentioned surgery as an alternative.
Yeah, there's no question that there's a very interesting pyramid design produced by Health Quality Ontario, and the bottom of the pyramid are the largest group of people, and then at the top of the pyramid are smaller numbers of people. And when it comes to arthritis, there's a huge number of people at the bottom who have milder forms of arthritis, who can manage, with a little medication, with exercise, with physiotherapy, and so on. Then as you climb the pyramid, there are smaller numbers of people with more severe arthritis. And on the top group, and they actually said it was 4% of all people with arthritis who really need surgery and can truly benefit from surgery. So it's the people who have, obviously if there's no cartilage left in your knee, you can't walk very well without excruciating pain, and a knee replacement can be a miracle. Obviously, you have to have the courage to go forward and do that, but you're absolutely right. With severe arthritis, surgery can be miraculous.
Dr. Khan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Libby. Very nice to meet you. Yeah.
Okay, we have some online questions, and I think you've actually touched on some of the things that people want to know more about. So the first question, can CBD cause liver problems? Is it safe to take with methotrexate?
Okay. So you have to really look at the pathways. So we talk about pathways that go through our liver. We have many of them. Methotrexate generally has been safe, but we always want to follow that patient, obviously, closely. We talk about, there's been just a paper released on the possibility that CBD may cause liver toxicity. It really, some people will have elevated liver enzymes, but the people that I've seen, I haven't seen that happen. So it may be something that is a one-off, but it's not something that I've seen in my practice.
Okay, here's something you did touch on. Cannabis is so expensive. Are there more affordable ways to access medical cannabis?
Well, I don't want you to go to jail, so that would be stealing it. So no. No, I think it's so challenging for many patients. There is the ability to grow cannabis under the medical regimen, but that I always kind of say, there's challenges with that in itself because patients aren't able to test their cannabis. For me as a physician, I really want to know what they're taking. The license holders will have certificate of analysis. And so we look at that certificate and we can say, is this working for you? We can look at the terpene profile, the cannabinoid profile. Whereas in the growing market, we don't see that. So until our insurance companies get on board, until we decide that we're not going to tax this medicine, we're kind of stuck with what we have.
Okay, we can now open it up to our studio audience. And what's your name, please?
My name's Brenda. I'm wondering, for example, I'm assuming you shouldn't drive if you're taking this stuff. And I'm assuming, what if you're looking after grandchildren? I'm talking about taking it for a medical reason. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be okay with doing that and looking after grandchildren?
Well, Brenda, it depends on what you're taking. right? So if you're using high CBD, no intoxication.
Right.
If you're adding, so I have patients that will take 60 milligrams of CBD and add in maybe 2 milligrams of THC.
Well, that's what I heard you say, adding in that little
Right.
bit would
And
bad
so
effect.
that is, the CBD is really buffering the intoxicating effects of the THC. You're still getting the opiate-sparing ability from the THC, but no intoxication. So
You'd be okay.
can you drive? If you're not intoxicated. The rule of thumb is, and again, the low risk use guidelines are available as well, but if you feel intoxicated, don't drive. If you're taking THC and CBD at night for sleep, generally you should feel fine in the morning, unless you've taken too much, and then you need to check
So
yourself.
if you take these medications, say at night, so when you were sleeping, does it have the effect in the daytime of no pain, or you have to be taking it to have the no pain
So mostly patients are taking CBD during the day.
during the day? Okay.
Most of my patients are retired, so they're not having to worry about THC during the day. But most that use THC during the day are taking such small amounts with such a good CBD buffer that they're fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
There's more after the break. Stay tuned.
Don't forget, for free tickets to the show, go to www.universe.com and search Zoomer Media and log on to www.thezoomertv.com for full episodes and more.
Welcome back to the Zoomer. We've been featuring the Arthritis Society's new campaign, Arthritis Talks, Age with Optimism. Arthritis is painful and it can take a toll on your mental health as well. You should be open with your physician and be open to learning more about treatments you may not have considered. We want to thank Dr. David Kahn and Dr. Shelley Turner, as well as the Arthritis Society. For more information, you can visit arthritis.ca. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you soon. It's time to zoom out.